In the autumn of 1967, there were maybe 100 Negro students on the University of Washington campus. They were nearly invisible as a group, but as individuals, they stood out.
I was walking across campus one day and a student in braces said, everywhere I go, you damn niggas are here.
Sometimes racist voices echoed inside.
You can't deny what you are, but you don't have to like it. I know growing up, I actually thought it was a punishment. I did. I was already insecure and all those things. So it was like, and of course you'd be black. Of course God would make you black because you're all these other negative things.
The faculty and administration were overwhelmingly white.
I was the only black professor there at the time. There were very few black students, and the atmosphere was kind of a hands-off. I didn't find hostility, just disinterest and a lack of overt recognition that it's not a good place if a university doesn't have diversity.
All that was about to change. In May 1968, members of the Black Student Union took over President Charles Odegaards' office. It was the genesis of profound change at the University of Washington. In the 1950s and 60s, Seattle wasn't supposed to be racist.
When I came to Seattle, I thought that I would be getting away from the Jim Crow era, from the prejudice that I'd experienced in the South.
In reality, racial discrimination was just under the surface.
It was much more subtle and not as blatant as in the South, but there was clear discrimination in housing. If an African American family wanted to move into what was a white neighborhood, there was strong resistance, and real estate agents and others simply wouldn't show them housing. If you were a minority, you couldn't even dream of getting into the Washington Athletic Club or the Rainier Club or any of the social and big clubs of the day. You wouldn't ever think of them being president of the Rotary or the Chamber of Commerce or anything like that.
It was very informal, but it was also very vivid. You kind of knew different parts of town where you were welcome and where you weren't welcome.
I was born and raised in Seattle. All I knew about Seattle was the downtown area, the central area, and South Seattle, especially Beacon Hill, where I was raised. I knew Seattle as being a very racially diverse city. Black, Mexican, Filipino, Chinese, Japanese, white, diverse, or what I believed to be diverse at the time. By going to the University of Washington, I found these vast neighborhoods north of Seattle that were all white. And I realized that the non-whites were herded into the central area and the southern part of town, that Seattle wasn't the way it appeared to be.
There had been successful students of color at the University of Washington. State Supreme Court Justice Charles Z. Smith went to law school at the UW.
It was 3 years of the most enjoyable period of my life. So I graduated from law school in June of 1955.
Carver Gayton was recruited to play football. The year he graduated, his team won the Rose Bowl.
The largest number of first-string African Americans that ever played in the Rose Bowl, we played in the 1960 Rose Bowl, was 4. There were 4 of us, and it's kind of hard to believe nowadays that that was regarded as a significant number.
But everywhere on campus, in any classroom, African American students were a tiny minority. For Amel Petry, a graduate student in chemistry, the university was a lonely place at first.
All of my classes in grad school, I was the only African American, and so it was very difficult.
This institution and many others were always kind of referred to as an alien academic environment for our people, more or less, because there were so few of us here. And as a student, I considered it pretty alien and at times even a little bit hostile, because a lot of people just weren't used to seeing people of color on campus. And sometimes you go by and people would stare at you, and You walk into class and sit down, and as people would come in the classroom, they flash and do double takes and that sort of thing. So
the university is a good place. It always has been a good place. It just was not an inclusive place. It didn't have the desire, the need from its perception to reach out to people who were different than the whites in that community.
By 1967, change was in the air. Negro students entering the University of Washington weren't simply grateful to be there, they were ready to make it their own. And they were ready to become black. Larry Gossett, a freshman in 1964, took a year off to do volunteer work. He returned as a junior, ready to make a difference.
I was 20 years old when I went to New York City as a VISTA volunteer. And I would have characterized myself as a young, individualistically ambitious Negro student. Notice I didn't say black. But when I returned, I would characterize myself as a black revolutionary. I had a big natural. I was wearing dark shades. I changed my name in New York from Larry Gossett to Abba Yoruba. And I began to read and critically look at racism and capitalism vastly differently than I'd ever looked at our society before.
Everything that was happening in the country at the time began to make sense. I began to identify with being black. I began to understand the different movements around the country.
And you know, when I first went to the U, I was not into being black. I mean, I felt a lot of the riots in Watts I thought were embarrassing, and that reflected very poorly on us, which I think is the function of how you feel if you're not necessarily brainwashed, but just if you buy into the dominant culture's attitudes towards you. And I'm not sure, but sometime during my sophomore year, it's almost like I had an epiphany and embraced being black.
And the fact that my features were different became acceptable and a norm for me.
Acceptance turned to activism. The first step was finding each other on campus.
We felt a real need to come together in some kind of way, and we did by congregating in the student union building in a certain area of the dining hall. And that became our place to meet together.
And we started talking, and for some it was just a social place, and we thought it was a great place to organize, and we started little conversations. And
it was a pretty natural process for us to move towards establishing a black student union so that we could be able to engage in issues that we thought needed to be addressed on the campus, number one, and also be a part of the issues and things that were taking place outside of the school.
We went from the Negro Students Society, then we changed our name to the Afro-American Student Society, then we went to LA and came back as the BSU.
About 30 young black youth from Seattle had gone to a black youth conference over Thanksgiving weekend in 1967, where we got exposed to some really revolutionary youth from California who had already at San Francisco State, the University of San Francisco, University of California, already set up black student unions. We got our name from them, we got our purpose from them, we got our original sets of demands to consider from the California BSUs. Suffice it to say, we were really inspired, really motivated to come back to Seattle and get even more involved in working for Black Power in our home community.
We went to the administration of the hub and we said, we want a blackboard put up in the area where we sit together so that we can communicate with the other black students. And they did it without any fuss, any fight. And in a certain sense, as minuscule as that was a very empowering act for us.
The birth of the University of Washington Black Student Union was announced in front of the Hub in January 1968.
The first thing was, okay, we're all here, we're all black, we're all minority, because it wasn't just black students. And what are we going to do? What are our goals? What are our objectives? And the first meetings were all about that.
A focal point was the lack of visibility and inclusion in every aspect of university life.
You'd meet all this bias in the classroom. Say we were studying the great ideas of our time, and none of the ideas of the people that we were interested in ever came up unless we brought it up.
We found that of the 3,000 main course offerings in arts and humanities, not only did no class deal with the black experience, we couldn't even find one professor or instructor that used a book written by or about African Americans, Asians, Native Americans, or Latinos.
My art professors told me there weren't any black artists of national merit. And I'm sitting up here saying, one of you is missing, because I got books that list Afro-American artists of international repute, and you're going to sit up in this class and tell me that, and I'm paying to come here to get an education, and you're miseducating me. I'm upset.
For us to come along and start talking about inclusion and liberation and the things we talked about at the time, it was radical.
Radical ideas were a hallmark of the late 1960s. Other students added their voices to the cause.
We had tremendous support from the white students. And we could not have done that, what we did, if we didn't have that support.
President Charles Odegard believed that change was necessary and inevitable, but the Black Student Union felt he was moving too slowly.
And he was trying to get us to see that in university communities, change can occur, but it has to be very incremental. And E.J. Brisker, our vice president, said, Dr. Odegaard, the university is 107 years old, man. And if you can't do better than 63 black students out of 32,000 and nothing in terms of curricular offerings dealing with the black experience, it's racist, it's got to change. And we're telling you it's got to change now. We would go into classes between that January and May period and say this is an institutionally racist campus and the curriculum is racist. They honestly did not know what are you talking about. We'd go into a American colonial history class, I remember, because I was one of the 3 black students that went in there, and the professor said, well, may I help you? And we said, we came in here to help you, man. He said, well, I don't remember inviting you. You didn't. We invited ourselves. We're going to teach the class. And we had prepared before then, and part of it was shock, but we're trying to get the white students and the professors to think about what we mean by black studies, what we mean by integrating curriculum so that you are teaching the truth.
What was funny were the memo wars, because I think we would issue our little proclamations, pass them out, pamphlets, and then there would be all these administration people, in their suits outside the hub, let's avoid a crisis, handing out their take.
It was somewhat tense. A lot of people were not used to being confronted over social issues like this, social justice in particular. You know how traditional universities are. And so being told almost in a demanding way and being confronted about the university's shortcomings, and of course no one likes to have their shortcomings pointed out, particularly publicly, but for a group of students to kind of be kicking these people in the shins and telling them what they should be doing about some injustices that they saw and needed to be corrected, created some tension for them.
We were naive, but we were also very committed and felt that our nation had to change if it was to benefit all of its people.
There are times that stand separate from the ordinary course of our lives, even before history gives them recognition. In 1968, the whole world felt it.
Czechoslovakia, Western Europe, Vietnam, third world countries, African liberation struggles. There was, people moving for change, revolutionary change, transformation of their social conditions, and all those things were coalescing at the same time, particularly on college campuses where people were thinking about the world and what was going to be their role in it.
It was a time of activism that I haven't seen since. It was the growth of the environmental movement for the first time. It was the rising tide of young voices against the Vietnam War. It was the sort of the second wave of the civil rights movement. And all of those were mixed together and focused on university campuses, where students were activist in a way that, as I said, I've never seen since.
Black student union members at the University of Washington organized chapters in local high schools.
The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife in the late 60s at Franklin High School in Garfield. You know, the contradictions of racism, the sense of pride and movement by black students was very present. So nothing surprised me. It was an extremely exciting time. I could clearly understand that the students had a point. It was not confusing to me to know what side of that equation I was going to be on.
The time had come for ideas to turn to action.
Carl Miller and I and Aaron Dixon had organized the Black Student Union at Franklin. And then by March, the principal had begun to kick black girls out of school for wearing their hair natural. It was just an outrageous, racist conduct in our opinion. So the students were very angry. We organized them, and they took over Franklin in the first sit-in Seattle, March 29, 1968. And the city fathers, the mayor, the city council, the superintendent of schools, Forbes, Bottomley were so upset. They said, this kind of stuff doesn't happen in Seattle. What's wrong with our young Negroes? It must be because outside agitators are influencing them.
The students were visible, present, noisy. They were asserting themselves. They didn't take a step back. They and the public schools, the city of Seattle was forever changed. Students felt a sense of self, of pride, of self-esteem, of militancy. So the thing that characterized both the occupation at Franklin and the occupation at the University of Washington was a massive grassroots action, and the system couldn't ignore it.
Several days after students took over the principal's office at Franklin, student leaders were rounded up by police. It was the day that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was killed.
On April 4th, 1968, they arrested Carl Miller, Aaron Dixon, and I for the sit-in at Franklin, because they said the students would have never done anything like that if it weren't for you blacks from the University of Washington.
Unbeknownst to us, Martin had already been assassinated. I stepped outside of my geometry class, and there were two detectives there waiting for me when I stepped outside the classroom. They put me in handcuffs and told me I was under arrest for unlawful assembly. At the same time, they were rounding up who they thought were key leaders. They had arrested Aaron, they had arrested Larry, they had arrested Carl Miller, E.J. several people that were key in the UW BSU, the Garfield BSU. They had arrested all of us. There was about 10 of us they arrested and rounded up. They thought that we were the key people to get off the street. And years later, of course, we realized they did that and timed it at when it happened because they thought that, you know, riots were going to break out across the United States, and they were effectively getting us off the street before anything could happen.
The arrests did nothing to discourage student activism. Young people truly believed in the power of protest.
It was the death of Martin Luther King that really pushed a lot of young people, not just black people, but a lot of young people, black, white, Latino, Asians, to thinking more militantly and feeling that since they killed Martin Luther King, then nonviolence is over. We have to look for other means. So we were already in crisis. There was nothing that we had to do. It was already happening that was already pushing us towards what we saw as revolution.
We'd meet in the Black Student Union office that was at the hub at the university on the second floor, and we'd decide what we could do to shake up the university to be aware of Native American issues, black student issues, anybody to listen to us.
We had to gauge what the university's reaction was and what we were going to do next. It was in that room, and by my recollection, there couldn't have been more than 12 people in that room when we took a vote to shut down the University of Washington, which was unanimous, but it was only 12 people, you know? But that 12 people voting to shut down the University of Washington tells you all you need to know about our state of mind. that we felt that we could do anything that we chose to do. And we were very, very serious.
The president of the university, President Odegaard, I think that the issue really got down to how could we impress upon him and other people in his administration that not only were we serious, that we had almost a social cause that was worth supporting.
It took a long time. It took several months to decide what the things we were. And when E.J. Brisker arrived, he developed the 5 demands that we presented to the university, and we were organizing around those.
On May 20th, 1968, organizing turned to action. The Black Student Union took its demands to President Charles Odegard and made history at the University of Washington.
Our thinking was words are not enough. It's just that simple. We gave them the words, and now we're going to give them the action. We're going to shut this thing down to let them know that we're serious and we expect our demands to be met.
The Faculty Senate was having an executive committee meeting. I was chairman of the Senate and of that meeting. President Odegaard was among those present. And we had a fairly long agenda.
Here we are at the president's office outside his building, getting ready to climb up the wall to go into his office to ask him to let a whole bunch of other folks who look like us into the university.
We just walked in. Nobody quite knew what we were doing. Everybody people were really afraid of a gathering of dark-skinned people.
At this point, I adjourned the executive committee meeting, and this becomes a sit-in.
It caused quite a stir on campus as we're cheering and marching and saying what we're going to do, and we marched in, and oh God, what a scene. When we finally got in there, 50 or 100 of us in the room, or I don't know, whatever the number was. A lot of excitement, a lot of shouting.
I heard there was some student climbing up by rope to come in a window, which was kind of an alarming scene, and there were lots of students on the ground down below on Red Square.
There were 2 people that day who went up the rope. I was one of them.
We were worried every other minute that the police or the National Guard or whoever was going to come in and arrest us all and take us away.
We had a nice crowd, a multi-ethnic crowd of Latinos and Indian students and white students and Asian students, and so it was a multi-ethnic takeover and just led by the Black Student Union.
And then high school students came and SDS people came, and I think I got nervous when some Black Panthers came because they had weapons and no one was about taking that on. And I think they left. I'm assuming they did. That was the one part that was scary. That, and there was a glass coffee table. I mean, those are the things, and my little need to control my environment, that caused me concern. Just that you could really, really get hurt.
We didn't know the seriousness of the consequences if it didn't work. But we were also, felt like we were warriors. And if we had to die for it, then so be it. But we weren't going to be deterred by the opinions of others because we knew that what we were trying to do, it needed to happen. The time had come.
While we were inside, we were afraid that state troopers and all that stuff who were, I think, over in one of the other halls that had a connecting underground tunnel to it were going to come up into the building and just beat us out of there.
I just remember being a little nervous because I wasn't sure that my commitment was going to extend to being struck.
There was one alarming factor, and that was that we heard that law enforcement was planning to come to the campus. And as I recall it, we understood that Dr. Odegard was stalling him. he didn't feel that this was necessary.
The administration of President Charles Odegard could have reacted quite differently than the way that they did. There were then and there are now tools of repression. There could have been arrest warrants. There could have been expulsions. There could have been student disciplinary hearings of some sort. Could have been a lot of things that we would have been confronted with. And perhaps if those things had occurred, the struggle would have been different. But Charles Odegard didn't do those things, and he wasn't of that type.
The main goal of the sit-in was to present the Black Student Union's demands to President Odegaard in a way that would demonstrate the students' determination.
All of the people didn't go into the room where the president was. There was an outer office, and maybe 20 or so students were in that outer office, and maybe 10 in the inner office. So there was not chaos. It was a logical, orderly approach to the 5 or 6 demands. I think about 5 demands they presented.
After 4-hour sit-in, the 5 basic demands that we put forth, Dr. Odegaard signed off on them. And they might have seemed revolutionary then. In retrospect, they weren't. They were basic reforms. That the university would recruit more Black, Latino, low-income Asian, because there were already a lot of Asians there, and Native Americans and poor whites. 2, that there be a Black Studies program set up on this campus. 3, we demanded a learning resource center. 4th, that there be more Black staff, from professors to counselors to administrators hired by the university. And 5th, that we be represented on every policy-making body on the campus.
All of them were acceded to after about 3-4 hours of discussion about which was most important, what all of them meant, and how should the university proceed, and what were the students asking the university to do. And that's when the president appointed some people to look at each of those issues in terms of implementation of a process to make them happen.
We left the University Administration building in triumph. We felt like we had made our point.
I think it caught us off guard too, that something did happen. A program got created that would let people in. I think we were prepared to, we talked a lot about, what are we going to do if they say no, and what are we going to do next? And we're going to ratchet everything up and become even more militant, but we didn't have to do that.
We felt like we were on the road to getting what we wanted.
A vital part of the sit-in's success was the character of the man in the president's office.
President Odegaard was an absolutely marvelous president, especially for that time. There were many college and university presidents in the country who collapsed under the pressure, who just didn't, who kind of gave in, or they went the other way and called in the National Guard and had the governor be tough, and so they seemed to go one of 2 extremes. And Odegard was wise enough and strong enough so that in the first place he had a presence. And having a presence is important in leadership.
He put us on the advisory committee he set up to set up a Black Studies program. He put us on the policy body to set up what eventually became known as the Office of Minority Affairs. He put us on a few other bodies that no students, white or Black, had ever been on.
He was a humanitarian. He's probably the greatest president of the University of Washington in our sight.
You know, if he were alive, I would apologize for sitting in and taking over his office.
Students left the sit-in with a promise for change. It had only taken a few hours. Fulfillment of that promise would take a few years.
We had a rough beginning. We didn't know what we were doing. I don't know if the university knew what it was doing, but it was a start. And it was a start in the right direction, and I'm very happy it happened.
Recruiting started immediately, as there was very little time to find and enroll students before fall quarter 1968. Bill Hilliard was hired in June, 2 weeks after the sit-in, to coordinate the effort. BSU students were involved as well.
We had a lot of cooperation from the admissions office. They actually worked hand in glove with us.
We recruited all over the state of Washington, and a number of students came who were sincere and really wanted to get an education and really graduated and went to go on to graduate school.
The fact that African Americans were speaking on behalf of the University of Washington, that was enough to convince me that that was the place I wanted to be. And they were talking about opportunity, about doors being opened.
Now, that was the farthest thing from my mind, was to go to the University of Washington, but it was something that I would have liked to have done. So they were telling us that, I was telling them that I couldn't go because I didn't have the grade point average and didn't have, the money, or it just wasn't in the plans at all. And they said, no, this is a whole new program, and they told us about the program. And I said, okay, I'll enroll.
We didn't know what to expect coming from small communities. We had this image of university students as sort of the prep image of students that go to Harvard, Yale, and so forth. So I went out and I bought this briefcase, and I still have it. And now I look at it and I wonder what I was doing with that thing. But that's sort of the extent of our preparation.
There just wasn't the counseling, the career counseling that I think we all needed in there, as far as the different schools on the campus was concerned, and how to manage our money, and different resources as far as even just dealing with the professors and the classrooms, because the classrooms were really large. Study groups, how to deal with study groups, and how to form them and stuff, and it was just it was hard.
We were essentially here on our own, and our best allies always were African American students. We turned to them for a kind of guidance. We followed their example. We did as they did, and that's how we began to learn how to organize ourselves on this campus. The first year probably was the toughest year. The second year, in '69, then we went to Eastern Washington, emulating what the BSU had done the previous year. We went out and recruited more Latino students. And we continued to do that as the years continued.
Zenobia Bailey was an academic casualty at the University of Washington. Without guidance, she wasn't focused enough to graduate, but the UW gave her the start she needed to succeed as an art major at another university.
It was good. It was a blessing. I feel like the UW and the whole Black Student Union program, even though it was hell going through it, I felt like it was a blessing, in disguise.
No one can guarantee who's going to graduate from college. But all we were doing is ensuring that the opportunity existed.
The help and support that many students needed came later, in answer to another of the BSU's demands, when the UW's Office of Minority Affairs was formed. In 1968, it was known as the Special Education Program, or SEP. Charles Evans ran it.
The goals included, as a very central point, that this program should not be just for Black students. It should be for students who were deprived, for one reason or other, whatever, from having a full opportunity for education at the University of Washington. And this meant, in general, students from minorities who were underrepresented on campus. Underrepresented meant that they, as a proportion of students, were below the number expected on the basis of their proportion in the general population. And this would be principally students of certain racial groups, but also students who had grown up under poverty.
Charles Evans worked closely with students in the year following the sit-in. There were issues to work out and a program to create. To do that, Dr. Evans had to establish bonds with students. He kept a book on African American history in his office.
Black students would come in and see that, and they'd talk about it a little bit, and page it. And that was pretty nice. And so I got 5 of them. And as they came up and talked about it, so on, I loaned them a book.
There were faculty and staff to win over as well.
I kind of think that back in those days, and to some degree even now, that there was theoretically people bought in on the concept, but when it came right down to making it happen, getting the numbers in to the departments and so on, it was a very difficult row to hoe. So there was a lot of learning that needed to take place and understanding what the problems were in order to be able to make progress.
University operates very much through its faculty. And so Dr. Evans was very effective, I think, in marshaling the forces among faculty people and deans to kind of get them to come along and support the program.
The SEP became the EOP, or Educational Opportunity Program, continuing to reach out to students who might not otherwise attend the University of Washington or any university at all. Former Seattle Mayor Norm Rice, a journalism major, came to the UW through the EOP.
Being an EOP graduate, I carry a special badge of honor. Some people think of that, somehow that is a stigma to that somehow you weren't qualified. But it really isn't about being qualified. It's really about recognizing the barriers that are in front of individuals that come from different backgrounds in being absorbed into the university. And EOP paves the way for those barriers to be removed. And so I carry that honor with distinction.
In 1969, Charles Evans left the EOP to return to his position at the medical school.
The mind of man.
He consulted Sam Kelly, a history professor at Shoreline Community College, about the future of the program.
And he said, well, what do you think I should be doing? I said, first thing you ought to do is get yourself a good black guy to run your program, someone who's got ability.
After some persuasion, Sam Kelly agreed to accept the position as head of the newly created Office of Minority Affairs. He insisted on being appointed a vice president.
One vice president asked, well, why do you think that you should be appointed a vice president for the job? And that was one condition. I would not take a job at that level unless I was a vice president and report directly to the president of the university. It is so contentious that I will have my hands full dealing with all those fools who think all of us are crazy to try to do something like that. That's why.
Before becoming a professor, Dr. Kelly had been a lieutenant colonel in the Army. He knew how to lead, and he knew how to achieve respect for his new program.
It calls for initial design, Office of Minority Affairs in the whole country, but any major university that I ever saw. If they did anything for minorities or women, it was in some back room with a little sign to women program, and it was hardly visible. And as I told President Odegaard when I agreed to take the job, that I would take it provided we were able to grow even during times of economic downturn. And I indicated to him that I didn't want a job that my office would be over near the football shed behind the stadium.
Starting with a small staff, including those who had been working for the EOP, Dr. Kelly built the Office of Minority Affairs into a strong campus institution.
He really rounded us up because he got a collection of non-bureaucrats, non-educators trying to make social change at the University of Washington, a predominantly white, prestigious research institution with a group of social activists trying to fit in, playing two worlds, the university role and our community role. And Dr. Kelly, because he was from the military, kept us in line. He made us understand both worlds.
Sam Kelly and Charles Odegard made a powerful team, and they became close friends.
He was very good, he was very supportive, and he was just like an older brother. I loved the man, and I don't mind saying it.
Dr. Odegard was incredible. He had this presence and this aura about him of a commander-in-chief because, in part, his naval background. And he and Sam Kelly kind of shared in that because Sam was a retired lieutenant colonel from the Army, and they were real close. And we always had his support. And also things that happened, like when we get in some conflicts across campus, and there were very few, although some traditional schools were a little more difficult to work with than others, like the medical school. But I would go in and kind of say, hey, you know, I'd like to help you and work with you however I can, but you know, if you don't want to really cooperate with us, then, you know, I get Sam Kelly to come over. Oh, no, never mind. Yeah, we'll see if we can't work this out with you, Bill, and we don't want to deal with Sam. He doesn't have to come over here. That's okay. The mind of man.
Academically, the Office of Minority Affairs supported students through its instructional center. That support is even stronger today.
Someone's always rooting for you. Someone's always in your corner for you to be successful. They want you to succeed around here.
It's unbelievable. The quality of the teaching that goes on there is unbelievable. This does better than prepare them for college. This prepares them to succeed, to go far in life, to graduate work, to professional school, to whatever they want to achieve in life. That's a program that I have witnessed that's at the school now, and I'm so happy that I had a hand in it.
My bright idea was the Ethnic Culture Center, which is, I'm still proud of that. 40 years later, almost, but I got to write the proposal for the creating of the Ethnic Culture Center, a multi-ethnic center, with a library, study skills center, theater, because I was a cultural expert, and I believed that the revolution would be better being nonviolent if we could have some cultural institutions.
I'm proud of my culture, but you know, I'm even more proud about the school, that it allows me to do this.
It brought together groups that normally weren't together. Like we met a lot of Chicanos from the Yakima Valley who had very little interaction with blacks from inner cities, or Asians from Beacon Hill and Native Americans from Alaska. Because there was we had to learn and understand each other too. And there were some rough times, territory, staking out who we were and what we were about. We would be in a coalition, but they wouldn't give up who they were. So we had all growth we had to do. I had to learn what it was like being a son of migrant workers from Yakima Valley, or coming from a reservation in Alaska, stuff like that. So I grew on the job too.
One thing that we were really clear about doing when we were here in Mecha and involved in student politics was trying not to just highlight the divisions, but to highlight the commonalities, and that the problem with racism and sexism and homophobia and classism is all of our problem, and it affects us all.
In the wider campus community, the demand for Black studies was being discussed.
You have to have discussion with people throughout the institution so they can take ownership. It's their program, it's their institutional responsibility to ensure that the quality is there. And that's what they were concerned about. And some people, of course, use those ideas and those notions to try to beat back the idea of putting a Black Studies program on campus. They didn't see it as having any merit or any academic rigor. The real question always revolved around the notion of academic rigor. And once you got past that, you didn't have too much difficulty. As a matter of fact, one of my real concerns was that people were trying to make Black Studies so rigorous that it was more difficult to get a degree there than in some other parts of the university.
I think we were successful in making primary inroads into the institutions and allowing us participation into the institution. We got a Black Studies program. We got a Black and minority recruitment program for recruiting high school students from around the state, around the country. And that brought a lot more people on campus and into the educational environment and gave them a chance to join the middle class by having a good education.
We tried to get people to understand that We all have to be educated to our own best self-interest, and if you exclude people, you can never have anything other than the least common denominator. You cannot grow a vital society based upon notions of we and they, and we and they have to survive using the same resources. So this is where we began, and we tried to educate everybody, not just the students on campus, but faculty, the community. I guess I spent half of my time outside of the university working with community groups or speaking at churches and synagogues and other places to get folk involved in the process.
The beginning of change was not the end of protest. In the spring of 1969, there was a demonstration on campus in support of minority contractors. It became violent.
They pushed a tractor in the hole down here at the meeting hall site, and people were arrested, and a couple of contractors or workers, were pulled out of their tractors, and a few blows were struck, and there was some violence on campus then.
Everyone seemed to have a cause.
In the late 60s, early 70s, sociology courses, political science courses, they were centered on issues of social justice, of poverty. So beginning in the fall of '68, almost immediately after we arrived, we dedicated ourselves to not allowing any grapes to be sold at the University of Washington. This campus was one of the first campuses in the nation to stop selling grapes. It was a tremendous triumph for us. We brought Cesar Chavez to speak. We brought the United Farm Workers Theater to perform here.
The whole campus was going through the change. The issues of race, war, the first beginnings of Earth Day, all were happening at that time, and the discussions were just beginning to go.
Sometimes there was retaliation against protesters.
We were marching, and we were near 50th Street, and they said the police were coming. Everybody ran, everybody. I don't know how many people were there, but there had to be at least over 200. Well, I ran south on University Way between 47th and towards 45th. And I got caught and I got knocked to the ground.
I remember a large demonstration here on the campus, and in order to disperse the crowd, someone in the administration came up with the idea of bringing in bees. I don't know if you haven't heard that story? Yeah, they bought like 3 truckloads of bees and let the bees out to disperse the demonstrators. So that was kind of funny, and it did disperse the crowd too.
On the football team, long simmering tensions came to a boil. Carver Gayton had been hired as an assistant coach to try to defuse the situation.
Some of the black ball players became very concerned about how they were being treated. I saw myself as, kind of a mediator. I came there primarily, as I indicated to everybody, to the public, to the players, and to the coaches, that I was there to look out for the best interest of the African-American ball players, to make sure that they were going to be treated fairly, and so on.
Coach Jim Owens decided to crack down on his team, demanding loyalty of all players. After interviewing everyone on the team, he dismissed 4 African Americans from the football program just before a game at UCLA.
These kids that were released, they were leaders on the team, they were bright guys. In essence, I don't think they were, they should have been regarded as rabble-rousers or anything of that sort. But they were articulate and voiced their opinions. Well, the other African-American players decided, that they were not going to go down to the game as a result of what happened to those players. And so I decided to stay with them also, and so I remained at home with those ball players.
The 4 young athletes went on to very successful careers. Carver Gayton resigned as coach and took on another stressful position, the first Affirmative Action director at the University of Washington.
The mindsets of people were much different then than they are now. It was hard work. I mean, just as an example, when I was talking to the law school, to the head of the law school back in the early 1970s about bringing in more law professors, because there were none back in those early days. There were no African American law professors. And one of the comments that was made, I don't know if it's by the dean or the associate dean, said, well, we sent a letter to Thurgood Marshall, and Thurgood Marshall, refused us. Well, I think at that time Thurgood Marshall, had just been appointed to the Supreme Court. I mean, those are the kinds of things that, just kind of mind-boggling responses that you got, back in those days. That's one of many where you just didn't, the true commitment in terms of making this whole thing work really was not there.
There was conflict within the movement.
There were differences about the Vietnam War, which side, what positions we should take. People thought Dr. King was wrong to say to oppose the war. I was in the military. I had been in the military. I had to re-examine my beliefs about the uses of military force. I thought we should bomb them back. The way to fix it was to bomb them. If you drop enough bombs, they'll go away. And slowly came around. I ended up being against the war and supporting people who were resisting the draft and things like that. But it was an evolution. It didn't happen overnight. And these were painful struggles.
There was conflict between the Black Student Union and the Black Panther Party.
Even though there was a blending of the two, there became a time, and it happened very soon, where it was quite obvious it was two different things. That the Black Panther Party, being a student and being in the BSU and going to school and working around issues on campus and justice for issues on campus was one thing. And being in the Black Panther Party was almost totally another thing, because the Black Panther Party was considered a militant organization that talked a lot about revolution and believed in arming ourselves for self-defense, and were involved in a whole lot of other things that weren't necessarily people in the BSU didn't want to be involved in.
There was internal conflict between loyalty to the cause and loyalty to oneself.
The issue really was, do intellectuals who are on a campus, no one comes to the campus to learn how to be a blue-collar worker. You come here to be a white-collar worker or an intellectual or whatever, an academic or something, a scientist. Would they be at the forefront of a revolution? And we said yes, but we were still struggling with what that really meant.
Was it fair? If I was really an activist, if I was really committed to the movement, should I pursue academic subjects on campus? I mean, it seems silly now to even think that was a legitimate thing to consider. I mean, that you wouldn't pursue a university education, but at the time it was a real critical decision. It was hard. It was a hard decision to make, I have to say.
And there was conflict about the role of women in the movement and in society in general.
Martin Luther King and the guys got the credit and the claim, but the folks who did all the organizing back in the office, making the telephone calls, writing all the letters, soliciting funds and doing all that other kind of stuff, making the food for the receptions for the fundraisers and all this other kind of stuff were all women.
But, when the cameras came, they even mentioned their name, or they didn't get the recognition that they deserved. And that was pretty true throughout the movement almost everywhere. It wasn't just, it was like the men would rush the microphones, and that's the way it is,
The spokesman, they just pretty much had their pick of whomever they wanted to have a little affair with, and among 3 or 4 women, if that's what they chose, that's what they chose.
I didn't know I had those kinds of attitudes. I didn't know I expected women to be subservient. I did expect the women to get coffee and to get the food and to be the secretaries and the clerks, and it was shocking.
In the Ethnic Cultural Center's Black Room, artist Eddie Walker painted a tribute to the women of the day.
I am proud because a single black woman brought me up and helped train me, and without them, we'd be nothing.
Many radical students of the 60s grew up into lives of public service. Amel Petry spent over 20 years at the Office of Minority Affairs Instructional Center.
what we were practicing and what we dreamed of, I wanted to have an opportunity to see if we could realize that dream in its fullest form. So I decided to stay.
Eddie Demings is a labor attorney in New York.
It really is a job that is consistent with the very deep beliefs that I developed at the University of Washington.
I did get a master's in business administration at Atlanta University, but not-for-profit works better for me because I feel that I have more of an opportunity of making some kind of difference.
A lot of us have continued with that idealism, and a lot of the work that we are doing now, reflects that, reflects our desire to want to make things better for our community or other communities or people in the world.
I think the profound moments stay with you for a lifetime. And the late 60s, early 70s for me was a critical period in my life because it sort of shaped who I was to become as a faculty member at the University of Washington.
There's a recognition that the struggle continues, that we all share responsibility for shaping the world we choose to live in.
That's what happened back in the 60s, just starting the discussion, pushing for it, and then, and then that's just the beginning, and, people to come have to continue doing that.
To say, let's open up education to more people. Let's get more people educated so that we can have an educated society.
It's not something I believe that we will ever get to when we can say, gee, we're finished. Because we're talking about humans, we're talking about very complex beings and very complex feelings, and it's going to be a never-ending, continuing, movement toward, I don't know if you'd call it perfection or not, but at least toward total acceptance of each other.
Whom do we include in our circle of friendships? Do we have friends who are different than we in any way? Whether it is gender, whether it is sexual orientation, whether it's language, whether it's culture, whatever it happens to be. And I think that every one of us can develop an ability to have an open mind and to deliberately bring into our world persons who are different than we.
When we look at it in terms of we and they, it's always we are right and they are wrong. But if we look at it as we and they in a process together, we can make a difference.
If we want to be competitive as an institution of learning that's going to provide benefits to society as a whole, having a diverse population of faculty, a diverse population of students, that's going to make the university sustain itself for the 1,000 years that people talk about.